Hello everyone and welcome to week 4 of English 112 Critical Writing and Reading. This week we're going to talk about definition, as it is all about making the terms favorable to you in an argument. Definition is a rhetorical strategy used to get a grip on an argument. The way you define a term or an issue determines how it will be received. You need to know your audience, of course, and what kinds of commonplaces they adhere to. It is best used when you don't have a good grasp on the facts, or any facts at all. Definition is part of an overall strategy called stance. This involves, in order of importance, facts. If you know them and they work in your favor, use them. If not, you're going to want to fall back on redefining the terms so that you can favor your argument. Or you can accept your opponent's terms, but then argue the quality of the argument, saying, of course, that your opponent's argument is less important than it seems. And if that doesn't work, then the last stance you want to take is one of relevance, claiming that the discussion is irrelevant. This should be used as a last resort, as it carries with it big risks. People are either going to separate or bond over an argument based on relevance. For an example of how this strategy works, see your text and the brief anecdote about the kid who was caught smuggling a candy bar before dinner. When we talk about rhetorical definitions, we are not talking about what you can find in Webster's dictionary. We are actually talking about connotation versus denotation. Denotation is the literal meaning of a word. For example, the denotative definition of is an intransitive verb, third person singular present indicative of be. Now, if your eyes glazed over when you looked at that dictionary definition, there's a reason for that. Denotative definitions don't tell us much more than the actual facts of a word. What we're interested in is the connotation, which is the unconscious thoughts that the term sparks in people's minds. For example, the connotative definition of is, at least according to Bill Clinton after that whole Monica Lewinsky scandal, is it depends on what the meaning of the word is. If is means is and never has been, that is not, blah 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 blah. You get my point. So again, what emotions are you eliciting from the definitions that you choose? Now, commonplace words are emotionally charged and are the key words used when we discuss what an audience values. For example, we notice that in the conception of the child who was caught with the candy bar before dinner, we can see that there's a big emotional pull, a big difference between smuggling versus hiding. If you recall from the anecdote from the Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns refers to a nuclear accident as an unexpected fissure as opposed to the meltdown, we can see that certain words carry with them more positive connotations than negative ones. And of course, from the very beginning of our book, the question of seduction versus manipulation in order to get what you want, again, carries with it different implications. You want to use the commonplaces that are most popular with moderates and undecideds. Those are your most persuadable audience. The issue should be as broad as possible to appeal it to as many people as possible. For example, culture of life is an anti-abortion stance versus government intrusion, which was the pro-choice stance. Culture of life carries with it broader and more positive terms than the word intrusion. The most persuasive rhetoric is deliberative, of course, and deals with the future. After we define an issue, we then need to present it in the future tense with concrete steps to be taken. Remember, redefining your terms is usually the best way to define a term. Definitions work best when they are personal, as we see. Definitions are more persuasive if the commonplace terms you use are positive rather than negative. This is kind of a no-brainer. We know that people react positively to positive words and negatively to negative words. Now let's look at some of the concepts revolving logos, or argument by logic, which will be your pass for your quiz this week. The L will not be capitalized. Logos is applied after you've established your character and gotten your audience in a good mood. Logos focuses on rational strategy, definition, and the subtle tactics of manipulation. Now, it's important to note that when we talk about logic in the rhetorical sense, we're not talking about facts. Bad logic wastes time, such as the excuse, other kids get to do it. Emotions actually can be logical. A dialectic is an argument based on pure formal logic and has little to do with daily conversations and getting what you want. As you know from reading your assigned pages this week, logos means more than logic. The Bible translates it literally as the word. It can help you spot fallacies, which aren't necessarily unpersuasive. Arguments based on logic can help you apply facts if you have them, values, and attitudes towards a particular problem or issue. Remember, it's all about the rhetorical logic. The opinion of your audience is as good as what it knows and thinks is true. There are several parts of formal logic that we will talk about. There is the syllogism, which has a sort of well-duh quality about it. The classical example, of course, being all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Starting with something true, following it with another truth, and then you reach a conclusion that must therefore also be true. We then have the enthymeme, which is as unpronounceable as it does make sense, streamlines the syllogism. It takes a commonplace, which of course is a belief, value, or attitude, and uses it as a first step to convincing the audience. An example of this from your book is, babes go for Mustang owners, and if you go for babes, then you should buy a Mustang. Notice the if-then construction. Then there are the deductive or Sherlock Holmes forms of logic, which is deductive logic. This begins with a premise, which is a factor or commonplace, again, a belief, value, or attitude, and it applies it to a specific case to reach a conclusion. The premise is the proof. The choice you want your audience to make is the conclusion. Every logical argument must have a proof and a conclusion. In a deliberative argument, the kind we're shooting for, the conclusion is a choice you want your audience to make. Inductive logic is the opposite of deductive logic. It begins with a specific case and uses it to prove a premise or a conclusion. Anyone born more than a century and a half ago is dead. Therefore, all humans are mortal, is an example of inductive logic. When using inductive logic, it's always important to use examples. Facts are important examples that you apply to a choice you want your audience to make. Comparison examples allow your audience to weigh the benefits and disadvantages of the choices offered to them. A story, of course, is an example that illustrates for the audience the possible effects of following through on their choices.